Welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I stayed married just for the kids. It's a phrase you hear thrown around, a cliche almost, something murmured over coffee with a friend or typed anonymously into a forum late at night. For me, it wasn't a cliche. It was a life sentence, a verdict I passed on myself in the dead of night 15 years ago, illuminated by the cold blue glow of a computer screen. The house was silent then, the kind of deep suburban silence that's filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle snores of children sleeping soundly in their beds, blissfully unaware of the fracture lines spiderwebbing through the foundation of their world. I was 42. I thought I knew who I was. I was a husband, a father, a provider. I was the guy who coached Little League, the guy who manned the grill at neighborhood barbecues, the guy whose lawn was always meticulously edged. Our family photo from that year sat on the mantelpiece, a testament to a life well lived. Me with my arm around my wife Sarah, her smile bright and effortless. Our son Ben, then 12, all gangly limbs and a rebellious tuft of hair he refused to brush. And our daughter Chloe, a sweet, gap-toothed 8-year-old, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. We looked perfect. We were the family people pointed to and said, "They've got it all figured out." And why wouldn't they? We had the 4-bedroom house, the 2 cars in the garage, the annual vacations to the beach where we'd build sandcastles and take hundreds of photos to catalog our happiness. I believed in that happiness. I had built it, brick by painstaking brick. I had worked 60-hour weeks to afford the mortgage. I had attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every single event that mattered to my children. I was present. I was involved. I was, by all accounts, a good man, a good husband, a good father. The lie of it all is what chills me now. Not the big, ugly lie that I would soon uncover, but the smaller, more insidious one I had been telling myself. The lie that if you just follow the blueprint, if you check all the boxes, you can build a life immune to ruin. My life wasn't a fortress. It was a house of cards, and a single gust of wind was about to bring it all down. The night it happened was unremarkable. Sarah was asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her breathing was too even, too steady. It was a performance, one of many I would come to recognize. I was in my home office, trying to find a digital copy of our home insurance policy for a refinancing application. I remembered Sarah saying she had scanned it onto her laptop. Her laptop was a sleek, silver thing, always present, always on. It sat on the kitchen counter during the day and on her nightstand in the evening, a portal to a world I was not a part of. I rarely used it. We had our own digital spaces, our own little kingdoms of files and emails. But the insurance document was important, and I didn't want to wake her. I carried the laptop into my office, the metal cool beneath my fingertips, and powered it on. The desktop was cluttered with icons for work, for her online book club, for the kids' school portal. I navigated to the Documents folder, my eyes scanning the list of file names, recipes, vacation plans, book club notes, and then I saw it. A folder named simply Insurance. My first thought was one of relief. There it is, simple, easy. I clicked on it. But the folder wasn't filled with PDF scans of legal documents. It was filled with other folders, dozens of them, each one labeled with a date and a single initial. June 2008, M. August 2008, M. October 2008, M. It went on and on. My blood ran cold. A different kind of insurance, not for the house, but for the heart. Or maybe, more accurately, for the ego. A contingency plan, a backup life. I shouldn't have looked, I know that. Some doors are meant to remain closed. But my hand moved of its own accord, the cursor hovering over the most recent folder. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I clicked, and my world ended. It wasn't just a few incriminating emails or suggestive texts. It was a life, a whole secret life documented in excruciating detail. There were photos, hundreds of them, photos of Sarah with a man I knew, Mark, a colleague of hers from an old job, a man who had been to our house for dinner, a man I had shaken hands with, shared a beer with, laughed at his stupid jokes. They were at a winery, clinking glasses, Sarah's head thrown back in a laugh I hadn't heard in years, a genuine, unburdened laugh. They were on a hiking trail, the autumn leaves a blaze of color around him, his arms slung casually around her shoulder. They were in a hotel room, the sheets rumpled, Sarah wearing his dress shirt, a champagne flute in her hand, her smile intimate and knowing. It was the intimacy that gutted me. It wasn't just sex. This was a relationship. This was companionship. This was the life, the connection, the partnership that was supposed to be mine. There were videos too, short clips of them talking, laughing, just being together. In one, she was telling him a story, her hands animated, her eyes sparkling. I watched it 3 times. I was mesmerized by this woman who looked like my wife, but wasn't. The woman in the video was vibrant, carefree, alive. The woman who shared my bed was tired, distant, perpetually sighing over the burdens of domestic life. I went through every folder, a morbid archaeologist unearthing the artifacts of my own destruction. I traced the timeline back. 5 years. She had been living this double life for 5 years. Half a decade of lies, of stolen weekends, of feigned illnesses, of work conferences that were actually romantic getaways. The pain was physical. It was a hot, searing poker in my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to smash the laptop against the wall. I wanted to storm into our bedroom, drag her out of bed and scream at her until my throat was raw. I wanted to show her the evidence of her betrayal, to watch her perfect world crumble around her. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked out of the office. I walked down the hall, past Chloe's room, her nightlight casting a soft glow on her sleeping form, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. I paused at Ben's door, listening to the soft rustle of his sheets as he shifted in his sleep. These 2 beautiful, innocent children. They were the only pure, good things left in my life. And the thought of what this would do to them, of the bomb I was about to detonate in the center of their world, stopped me cold. A divorce wouldn't just be the end of my marriage. It would be the end of their family. It would be custody battles and shuffled weekends and 2 Christmases. It would be their home, the only home they had ever known, sold off. It would be their parents, the 2 pillars of their universe, turned into bitter enemies. It would be a wound that would never fully heal, a scar they would carry for the rest of their lives. Sarah's betrayal was a knife in my heart, but destroying my children's lives to soothe my own pain felt like an act of unimaginable selfishness. And so, in that dark hallway, surrounded by the ghosts of my shattered marriage and the innocent dreams of my sleeping children, I made a choice. I would stay. I would swallow the poison of her deceit and carry it inside me. I would play the part of the loving husband. I would maintain the facade of the happy family. I would sacrifice my own happiness, my own truth, for theirs. I walked back into the office, copied the entire insurance folder onto a hidden, password-protected external hard drive, and then deleted the original from her laptop, wiping the recycle bin clean. It was my insurance policy now. I closed the laptop, put it back on the kitchen counter where I found it, and went to the spare bedroom. I lay down on the bed, staring into the darkness. The images from the folder seared onto the inside of my eyelids. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin, and I had no script, no director, only a silent, burning rage and a love for my children so fierce it eclipsed everything else. The man who went to sleep that night, or who at least closed his eyes and pretended to, was not the same man who had woken up that morning. The old me was gone, buried under the rubble of 1,000 digital photographs. In his place was an actor, a spy in his own home, a man with a secret that would eat him alive from the inside out for years to come. I was a husband in name only, a father in every way that mattered. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the road ahead would be the loneliest one a man could ever walk. I had chosen my children, and in doing so, I had lost myself. The dawn was still hours away, but my new life, this hollowed-out existence, had already begun. The years that followed the discovery were a masterclass in deception, a long, drawn-out performance where I was the lead actor, the director, and the sole audience member to the grim reality behind the curtain. On the outside, nothing changed. That was the genius of my plan, the core of my sacrifice. The family photo on the mantelpiece was updated annually, our smiles just as wide, our poses just as practiced. We still hosted the neighborhood barbecues, I still coached Ben's baseball team, we still attended Chloe's dance recitals. I was the doting husband, bringing Sarah coffee in the morning, kissing her goodbye as I left for work, asking about her day when I returned. I was a machine of domestic normalcy. I played the part so well, I sometimes scared myself. I remembered birthdays and anniversaries, bought thoughtful gifts, planned surprise date nights to the restaurants she loved, all while the knowledge of her other life, her real life with Mark, coiled in my gut like a venomous snake. Every act of kindness, every loving gesture, was a lie. It was a carefully placed brick in the wall I was building around my children, a wall to protect them from the truth. But inside that wall, I was suffocating. The house, once my sanctuary, became my prison. Every room held a memory that was now tainted. The kitchen, where she'd lean against the counter, smiling at her phone, was no longer a scene of domestic bliss, but a potential communication with him. Our marital bed was a torturous landscape of feigned intimacy, where I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid with suppressed rage, while she slept peacefully beside me. Her every touch felt like a violation, her scent on the pillows a reminder of her betrayal. I developed a kind of sixth sense, an acute awareness of the tales of her deception. The way her phone was always angled away from me. The sudden need to take a walk to clear her head after a tense moment between us. The vague answers about her day, peppered with details that felt rehearsed. I never confronted her. I never let the mask slip. Instead, I became a silent archivist of her lies. I would cross-reference her stories with the calendar of my mind, the work dinner that coincided with an anniversary from the pictures in the folder, the weekend spa retreat with friends that matched the dates of a trip to the coast I saw documented on my hard drive. My secret folder, my own insurance, grew. I didn't know why I kept collecting the evidence. Perhaps it was a way to ground myself, to prove that I wasn't going crazy, that the pain I felt was real and justified. Or perhaps, on some dark level, I knew there would be a day of reckoning, and I would need my ammunition. The psychological toll was immense. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade anxiety. My sleep was plagued by nightmares, vivid replays of the photos and videos, sometimes with me as a helpless onlooker. I lost weight. I developed a nervous habit of grinding my teeth. My doctor told me my blood pressure was too high, that I needed to manage my stress. I would nod and smile, telling him it was just the pressure of work. How could I explain that I was living with the source of my stress, that I was sharing a bed with the very thing that was killing me? The loneliness was the worst part. I was an island. I couldn't confide in my best friend because he and his wife were our closest couple friends. Telling him would mean detonating their world as well, forcing them to choose sides, shattering the illusion of our happy foursome. I couldn't tell my brother because he was hot-headed and would likely confront her himself, blowing my careful charade to pieces. I couldn't tell a therapist because saying the words out loud, admitting the depth of my misery, felt like a point of no return. So I carried the burden alone. I would go for long drives with no destination, just to be in a space where I didn't have to pretend, where I could let the agony wash over me. I would sit in my car in an empty parking lot and scream into the steering wheel until my throat was raw, then compose myself, put on a placid expression, and drive home to play the part of the happy husband once more. My only moments of genuine, unadulterated joy were with Ben and Chloe. They were my anchor in a sea of deceit.
When I was teaching Ben to drive, the focus required blotting out everything else. When I was helping Chloe with her science fair project, her earnest curiosity and excitement were a balm to my wounded soul. These moments were real, they were untainted, and they were what I clung to. They were what made the sacrifice bearable. But even that was a double-edged sword. As they grew older, they became more perceptive. There were times I would see a flicker of confusion in their eyes. Chloe once asked me, "Daddy, why are you always sad when you think no one is looking?" The question was a dagger to the heart. I forced a laugh, ruffled her hair, and told her I was just tired from work. I realized with a jolt of horror that my performance wasn't flawless, that the cracks in my facade were visible to the very people I was trying to protect. They might not have known the reason for the tension, for the palpable coldness that often filled a room despite the smiles, but they felt it. They were growing up in a house filled with unspoken truths and a quiet, simmering resentment. And I had to wonder if my noble sacrifice was actually a different kind of poison, a slow-acting one that was teaching them that this was what a marriage looked like, that love was about distance and duty, not joy and connection.
There were close calls. One evening, Sarah left her email open on the family computer. I saw a message from Mark, the subject line simply "Tonight." My blood turned to ice. I wanted to click it, to read it, to arm myself with more proof of the treachery I already knew was happening. But Ben was sitting at the table doing his homework. He could have looked over at any moment. I walked over, casually closed the lid of the laptop, and asked him if he needed help with his algebra. The disconnect between the violent storm raging inside me and the calm, paternal exterior I presented was nauseating. I felt split in two, a man living two completely different lives simultaneously. One life was the lie everyone saw. The other was the truth that was eating me alive. Sarah, for her part, seemed to coast along in our silent arrangement. My lack of confrontation was, I believe, interpreted as ignorance. She became more brazen, less careful. The late nights became more frequent, the excuses flimsier. She had built her separate life and saw no reason to dismantle it because she was getting away with it. She had her stable family home, the loving father for her children, the financial security, and she had her passion, her escape, her soulmate on the side. She had her cake and was eating it too, while I was choking down the crumbs. And I let her. Every single day, I made the conscious choice to let her. Because every time the rage threatened to boil over, every time I came close to shouting the truth from the rooftops, I would look at Ben and Chloe. I would see Ben's excitement about getting his driver's license, or Chloe's tears over a fight with her best friend, and I would shove the anger back down. Their world was still intact. Their childhood was still, on the surface, idyllic. That was my victory. That was the prize I was paying for with my soul. I lost myself in those years. My own hopes, dreams, and desires faded into the background, becoming irrelevant noise. I stopped going out with my own friends. What was I supposed to talk about? My life was a lie. My entire existence was predicated on a performance. I was a hollow man, a shell, animated only by my duty to my children and the corrosive secret that was my constant companion. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the halls of a home that was no longer my own, waiting for the day my children would be old enough, strong enough to survive the explosion, waiting for the day my sentence would finally be over. The transition from a decade to 15 years was less a measurement of time and more a process of erosion. The sharp, jagged edges of the initial betrayal had been worn down by the relentless tide of daily pretense, leaving behind a smooth, hollow ache that was a permanent fixture in my chest. The fiery rage that had once fueled me had cooled into a sort of bleak, functional despair. I had played the part of the devoted husband for so long that the lines between the character and the man had started to blur. I would catch my reflection in a window and not recognize the person staring back. His eyes were dull, his shoulders perpetually slumped, the corners of his mouth permanently turned down in a way that no forced smile could ever truly erase. I was a man who had sacrificed his core, his very essence, for a cause he was beginning to question. The greatest irony was that my sacrifice, my long and silent suffering, had been predicated on a single, unwavering principle: protecting the children. And as they grew, as they transformed from the little boy and girl I had vowed to shield into young adults with lives and minds of their own, that principle began to feel less like a noble calling and more like a fool's errand. Watching Ben and Chloe navigate their teenage years was a special kind of torment. They were becoming their own people, full of dreams and dramas and heartbreaks. I listened to Chloe cry for a week after her first boyfriend broke up with her, and I held her and told her that her heart would heal, that real love shouldn't hurt like that. The hypocrisy was a bitter pill in my throat. What did I know of real love? I was living in a mausoleum dedicated to its memory. I watched Ben fall in love for the first time, saw the way he looked at his girlfriend with a sincerity and openness that I could only vaguely remember feeling myself. He would talk to me about their relationship, asking for advice, and I would dispense the kind of Hallmark card wisdom that felt utterly fraudulent coming from my lips. Honesty is the most important thing, son, I'd say, my own life a monument to the opposite. Communication is key. I was teaching my children about a world I didn't live in, about a code of conduct I had long since abandoned in my own marriage, all for their sake. Each step they took towards independence was a tick of the clock, counting down to my own liberation, but it was also a reminder of the years I had lost. When we toured college campuses with Ben, I felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought me to tears. This was it. This was the culmination of it all. We had done it. We had raised a smart, kind, capable young man who was about to embark on his own adventure. But as I watched him walk across the manicured lawns, pointing out the library and the student union, I also felt a profound sense of dread. The reason for my performance was about to walk out the door. The day we dropped him off at his dorm room was one of the hardest of my life. The three of us, Sarah, Chloe, and I, drove home in a silence that was thick with unspoken emotions. Chloe was crying softly in the back seat, mourning the loss of her big brother's constant presence. Sarah was dabbing at her eyes, playing the part of the emotional mother. And I was driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, feeling nothing but a vast, terrifying emptiness. The house felt cavernous with just three of us. The dynamic shifted. The buffer of two children was gone, and the space between Sarah and me became more pronounced, more impossible to ignore. We were two strangers cohabitating, our conversations limited to domestic logistics. Who was picking Chloe up from soccer practice, what we needed from the grocery store, whether the gutters needed cleaning. There was no intimacy, no connection, not even the pretense of it anymore. We had run out of script. The house grew quieter, and in the silence I could hear my own thoughts more clearly. Was it worth it? The question haunted me. Ben seemed happy and well-adjusted. Chloe was thriving in high school. On paper, my strategy had worked. I had delivered them to the cusp of adulthood with their family unit, however fractured beneath the surface, still intact. But what about the lesson they had learned from our marriage? They had spent their formative years observing a relationship devoid of warmth, a partnership based on a cold, unspoken truth. I feared I hadn't saved them from the trauma of divorce, but had instead given them a flawed blueprint for love, one that would lead them to their own unhappy endings. Sarah, meanwhile, had settled into our loveless arrangement with a sense of entitlement. My years of silence had been taken not as a painful sacrifice, but as a form of tacit permission. Mark was no longer a secret to be hidden away in a digital folder. He was a part of her life. She didn't flaunt it, but she didn't hide it either. There were phone calls she would take in another room, her voice low and intimate. There were unexplained absences, weekends away with girlfriends whose names I'd never heard before. She operated with the calm assurance of a person who believes they are untouchable. She had rewritten our history in her mind, casting herself as the victim of a passionless marriage and him as her savior. I was merely a logistical necessity, the co-parent and financial partner who kept the machinery of her comfortable life running smoothly.
The contempt I felt for her was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. It wasn't the fiery hatred of the early years. It was a deeper, more weary disdain. I saw her not as a monster, but as a profoundly weak and selfish person. And I saw myself as her enabler. My silence had empowered her, had allowed this charade to go on for far too long. The final 2 years after Ben left were a blur of waiting for Chloe to finish high school. Every school event, every milestone, felt like a lap marker in a marathon I was desperate to finish. Her senior prom, her final exams, her graduation ceremony. I cherished them for what they were, but they were also signposts on the road to my freedom. The day Chloe got her college acceptance letter, I felt a dizzying mix of pride and relief. We celebrated with a fancy dinner, the 4 of us, Ben having driven in for the weekend. We toasted to Chloe's future, to her bright new beginning. And all I could think was, my new beginning is almost here. We dropped Chloe off at her university in the fall. It was a repeat of Ben's departure, but this time the silence in the car on the way home was different. It wasn't sad, it was final. The nest was officially empty. My job was done. My sentence had been served. That night, the house was quieter than I had ever known it to be. It was just the 2 of us, 2 celestial bodies who had been orbiting each other out of a shared gravitational pull toward our children. Now, that force was gone, and we were just floating, untethered, in a vast, empty space. Sarah was on her laptop at the kitchen island, a glass of wine at her elbow. She smiled at something on the screen, a small, private smile that I knew wasn't for me. That was the moment. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final straw. It was just a quiet, profound realization that the show was over. The audience had gone home. There was no one left to perform for. I walked over to the counter, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The years of anxiety and rage had been replaced by a strange, unnerving calm. "Sarah," I said, my voice even. She looked up, her expression one of mild annoyance at being interrupted. "We need to talk." But I knew, and I think in that moment she knew too, that the time for talking was long past. The time for truth had finally, after 15 agonizing years, arrived. The confrontation, when it finally came, was nothing like the explosive, cathartic scenes I had played out in my head 1,000 times over the years. There was no shouting, no throwing of plates, no dramatic, tear-filled confessions. It was quiet, sterile, and more devastating than any screaming match could have ever been. I let a week pass after we dropped Chloe at school. I needed to be sure. I needed to let the reality of the empty nest settle in, to let the silence of the house confirm what I already knew, that there was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to pretend for. I spent that week in a state of strange detachment, observing Sarah as if she were a character in a play I was about to bring to a close. I watched her go through the motions of her life, a life that had run parallel to mine for so long but had so rarely intersected. On the 8th night, I found her in the living room, reading a book, the picture of domestic tranquility. The television was off. The only sound was the turning of pages and the hum of the air conditioner. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering the weight of 15 years of silence. "Sarah," I said. My voice didn't waver. She looked up, a bookmark in her hand, her expression neutral. "Can you get your laptop?" A flicker of something crossed her face then. Not guilt, not yet, but confusion, maybe a hint of irritation. "Why?" "I just need to show you something," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. She hesitated, then sighed and went to the kitchen to retrieve it. She placed it on the coffee table between us. I sat down on the couch opposite her. My heart was pounding now, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. "A long time ago," I began, my voice low and steady. "I was looking for an insurance document, and I found a folder on your computer with the same name." I watched her face. The color drained from it slowly, her skin turning a pale, waxy color. Her eyes darted from me to the laptop and back again. The book lay forgotten in her lap. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but the words were hollow, devoid of conviction. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice hardening. "Open it. Go on. Open the insurance folder." Her hands trembled as she reached for the trackpad. She fumbled, her fingers seeming to not obey her commands. She navigated to the documents folder, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. But the folder wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I had deleted it 15 years ago. A desperate, confused look crossed her face. It's not there. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the external hard drive. I placed it on the table between us. It was small and black and seemed to absorb all the light in the room. "It's okay," I said, the calmness in my voice terrifying even to me. I made a copy. The dam broke. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound.
The facade she had maintained for so long crumbled in an instant, revealing the panicked, guilty person beneath. "John, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, the question laced with the ice of a decade and a half of swallowed rage. "Can you explain the 5 years before I found it? Can you explain the 15 years since? Can you explain Mark? Can you explain the trips, the hotel rooms, the hundreds of photos? Can you explain how you've lived in this house, raised our children with me, and lied to my face every single day for 15 years? She started to speak, the words tumbling out in a torrent of excuses and justifications. The marriage was stale. I was distant. I worked too much. She was lonely. He understood her. It was the standard cheater's playbook, and every word was like salt in a wound that had never been allowed to heal. I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Don't you dare try to put any of this on me. You made a choice, and then you made it again every day for more than half of our marriage. The worst part, the part I will never, ever forgive you for, is that I've known the whole time." That was the blow that shattered her completely. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a dawning, uncomprehending horror. "What?" "I found the folder 15 years ago, Sarah, the night before Ben's 12th birthday party. I've known everything, every lie, every trip. I've known about Mark from the very beginning. I stayed for the kids. I played the part of the loving husband so that they could have a normal childhood, so their world wouldn't be blown apart by your selfishness." I let the weight of that confession settle in the room. I watched her process the scale of my deception, a deception born from her own. She looked at me as if for the first time, seeing not her oblivious, cuckolded husband, but a stranger, a man who had lived a secret life of his own, a life of silent observation and unimaginable pain. The aftermath was a slow, messy demolition. We told the children, now adults, a few weeks later. We sat them down in the same living room, the scene of my quiet confession, and we told them the truth. Not the sanitized, we've grown apart version, but the whole, ugly story. It was the hardest conversation of my life. Their reactions were a confusing mix of anger, disbelief, and a profound, heartbreaking sadness. They looked at their entire childhoods, their whole history, through a new lens. The family vacations, the holiday dinners, the happy photos, all of it was tainted, revealed to be part of an elaborate stage play. They were angry with her for her betrayal, but they were also angry with me for the lie, for letting them live in a false reality. "You let us believe everything was fine," Chloe said through tears, her words a fresh stab to my already wounded heart. "You were a stranger in our house this whole time." And she was right. I had saved them from the trauma of a broken home, only to inflict the trauma of a fake one. In the months that followed, as the lawyers divided our assets and dismantled the legal structure of our life together, I came to a terrifying realization. I had stayed for the kids, but in the process, I had completely and utterly lost myself. For 15 years, my identity had been defined by two things: being a father and being the man who knew his wife was cheating.
My days were structured around maintaining the facade, my inner life consumed by the anger and resentment I had to keep hidden. Now the children were gone and the secret was out. The scaffolding that had held me up for so long was gone, and I was in free fall. I had thought that once the truth was out, I would feel a sense of relief, of freedom, but there was nothing, only a hollow, echoing emptiness. Who was I without the secret? Who was I when I wasn't performing? I looked in the mirror and saw a 57-year-old man with haunted eyes and a life he didn't know how to live. My friends, when they found out, were supportive, but I could see the pity in their eyes. I was the poor guy who had wasted his best years on a lie. I didn't want their pity. I didn't know what I wanted. I stayed in the house, the silence a constant reminder of what I had lost. Not just my wife, but myself. The years I could have spent building a new, honest life, I had spent in a self-imposed prison. And for what? So my children could have a father who was physically present but emotionally a ghost? Was that truly the better option? I still don't have the answer. I see my children, and they are good, strong people. Perhaps my sacrifice gave them the stability they needed to become who they are. Or perhaps I simply delayed an inevitable pain, adding a layer of deep, complex deceit on top of it. What I know for sure is the cost. I didn't just lose years of my life, I lost the man I was supposed to be. He died 15 years ago in a dark office staring at a computer screen. I am what's left. A story of a sacrifice that may or may not have been worth it. A man who won the battle for his children's childhood, but lost the war for his own soul. Thanks for staying until the end. Let me ask you, when was the last time life surprised you in a way you never saw coming? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Reddit Whispers for more.